Funny thing about power, it doesn't always wear a badge where you can see it. Sometimes it looks like a quiet man in a worn denim jacket, standing next to an old off-grid fuel pump, while someone in designer heels tells him what he can and can't do on his own land. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. My name is Gideon Cross, and for the past 8 years, I've lived on a stretch of Wyoming land that most folks would drive right past without a second glance. 40 acres of scrub, wind, and sky. The kind of place where silence isn't empty, it's earned. I built everything here myself, piece by piece. Solar panels that hum softly under the sun, a well I drilled with my own hands, and, most importantly, a small, fully permitted off-grid fuel system. Diesel and gas, stored safely, inspected annually, and used strictly for my own equipment. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. The smell of fuel mixed with dry earth in the mornings, the low chug of the pump handle, the metallic click as it locked back into place, that was my routine. Predictable, honest, peaceful. That peace lasted right up until the subdivision showed up. About a mile down the ridge, developers carved out what they called Vance Creek Estates. Big houses, identical mailboxes, lawns that drank more water in a day than my well used in a week. And with it came the HOA. Now, I've dealt with HOAs before, usually from distance. But this one came with a woman named Patricia Vance. Mid-50s, always dressed like she was stepping into a boardroom instead of a gravel driveway. White SUV that never saw a speck of dust, sunglasses even on cloudy days, and a clipboard she carried like it gave her authority over gravity itself. The first time I saw her, I heard her before I saw her. Those sharp heels crunching against my gravel, completely out of place against the quiet rhythm of this land. I was checking the fuel gauge when she cleared her throat, loud, deliberate. "You're the owner here?" she asked, not a greeting, an inspection. I nodded, wiped my hands on a rag. That'd be me. Her eyes scanned everything. The tanks, the pump, the shed, like she was pricing it all out in her head. "I'm Patricia Vance, president of the HOA down the road. We've had some concerns." I didn't ask what concerns. People like Patricia didn't wait to be invited. "This setup," she continued, gesturing toward my fuel system, "represents a community resource. And frankly, it's irresponsible to restrict access when residents are in need." I actually paused, not because I didn't understand her, but because I wanted to be sure I'd heard her right. "You're saying," I replied slowly, "that my private fuel system on my land should be available to your HOA? She smiled then, tight, rehearsed, the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "I'm saying," she corrected, "that cooperation is expected in a community like this." There it was, that word, expected. I leaned back against the post, felt the sun warming the wood behind me. "Patricia," I said calmly, "this isn't your community. This is my property. That pump stays locked unless I'm using it." Her expression didn't crack, but something behind it shifted. Cold, calculating. She stepped closer, heels grinding deeper into my gravel, like she was trying to leave a mark. "We'll see about that," she said quietly. And just like that, she turned, walked back to her spotless SUV, and drove off without another word. The wind picked up a few minutes later, carrying dust across the open land, rattling the loose tin on my shed roof. I stood there for a while, looking at that pump, the same one I'd installed with my own hands, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not yet, just awareness. Because people like Patricia didn't walk away from something they thought they could control. They circled it, and I had a feeling she'd be back. Patricia didn't come back the next day, or the day after that. For a while, it almost felt like she'd tested the boundary and decided it wasn't worth the effort. But I've learned something over the years. Silence from people like her isn't retreat, it's preparation. About a week later, I noticed the first sign. A pair of SUVs parked along the dirt road, just outside my property line. Engines idling, windows cracked just enough for someone inside to watch without being obvious about it. I didn't approach them, didn't wave. I just went about my routine, checking the solar output, topping off the generator, locking. The fuel pump with the same solid click I'd always used. but I saw them watching. Every movement, every habit. 3 days after that, the situation escalated. I was midway through refueling my tractor when I heard engines approaching. Multiple this time. Tires crunching over gravel. Too fast, too deliberate. I turned, slow and steady, and watched as 4 vehicles pulled up just short of my gate. Patricia stepped out first, of course. Same polished look, same controlled posture, but now she wasn't alone. Behind her came 2 men in branded polos, the kind you see on mid-level contractors trying to look official, and a small group of residents, maybe 5 or 6, standing awkwardly like they'd been convinced this was some kind of community mission. Patricia didn't waste time. "We're here to resolve this," she announced, loud enough for everyone to hear, as if she was addressing a crowd instead of a man standing 20 feet away. I finished fueling, locked the pump, deliberately, and wiped my hands before responding. "Resolve what?" Her lips tightened. "You've created a bottleneck for essential resources," she said, gesturing dramatically toward the fuel tanks. "Residents have a right to access fuel in emergencies, and you're hoarding it." I let that hang in the air for a second. The word hoarding, that was new, carefully chosen, meant to sound serious, maybe even criminal. "This isn't a gas station," I replied evenly. "It's private storage, permitted, inspected, and used by me." One of the men behind her stepped forward, holding a clipboard like it gave him authority. "We've assessed the situation," he said, voice rehearsed, "and under community safety guidelines." I cut him off with a glance. Not aggressive, just enough to remind him he was out of his depth. He stepped back. Patricia didn't. She moved closer to the gate, fingers resting lightly on the metal, as if she was already imagining it open. "Gideon," she said, switching to a softer tone, almost reasonable. "You don't have to make this difficult. Share access, and this all goes away." There was again, not a request, a transaction. I shook my head slowly. No, the word landed heavier than I expected. Simple, final. For a moment, nobody spoke. The wind moved through the dry brush, carrying that faint scent of fuel and dust across the group. Then Patricia smiled again, but this time it wasn't controlled. It was sharp. "All right," she said, stepping back, "if that's how you want to play it." She turned to the small crowd behind her. "You all saw this," she announced. "Refusal to cooperate. Endangerment of community welfare." A few of them nodded, uncertain, but willing to follow her lead. That's when I understood what she was building. Not just pressure, narrative. She wanted witnesses. Validation. Something she could package into a story where she was the reasonable authority and I was the problem. They left after that, engines roaring a little louder than necessary, dust kicking up behind them like a curtain closing on a performance. But the real shift came over the next several days. I started hearing things. Conversations drifting from the road when neighbors passed by. Words like unsafe, illegal, he's refusing access. Someone had taken Patricia's version of events and spread it. Fast. And then came the detail that made everything click into place. A man from the subdivision, older, quiet type, stopped by one evening. He didn't come past the gate, just stood there, hat in hand, like he wasn't sure he should even be talking to me. "You charging folks for fuel?" he asked. I frowned. "No," he hesitated, then added, "That's not what we were told." That was the moment the whole thing snapped into focus. Patricia wasn't just trying to force access, she was already acting like she had it. Telling people there was fuel available, maybe even collecting money for it. Selling something that didn't belong to her. I leaned against the post again, feeling that same steady calm settle in, but now it carried weight. Because this wasn't just entitlement anymore. This was fraud. And the way she'd built it, public claims, witnesses, pressure, it meant she was all in. Which made what came next inevitable. I didn't confront Patricia. I didn't call her out, didn't warn the neighbors, didn't even correct the rumors that were spreading like dry grass, catching a spark. Instead, I did something that made her underestimate me completely. I stepped back. 2 mornings later, I drove down to Vance Creek Estates for the first time. Parked my truck along their pristine curb, dusty, out of place among polished SUVs, and walked straight into one of their community meetings Patricia had started hosting in a staged model home. The place smelled like fresh paint and artificial vanilla, Nothing real about it. Conversations died the moment I stepped inside. You could feel it. Eyes on me, quiet judgment already preloaded. Patricia spotted me immediately. Of course she did. She crossed the room with that same confident stride, clipboard tucked under her arm like a badge of office. Well, she said, just loud enough for others to hear, look who decided to join the community. I kept my posture loose, shoulders slightly slouched, just enough to look like I was there to negotiate, not fight. Figure we should talk, I said. Clear things up. That got her attention. Not suspicion, interest. The kind predators get when prey starts acting cooperative. She gestured toward a corner, away from the others, but still very much in view. I'm glad you've come to your senses, she said, lowering her voice. I nodded, slow, measured. Look, maybe I came off wrong. I've been doing things my own way for a long time. Not used to community expectations. The words tasted like sand, but they landed exactly how I needed them to. Her posture shifted, just a fraction, but it was enough. Shoulders relaxed, chin lifted. Victory, in her mind, was already taking shape. That's understandable, she replied, smoothing her tone into something almost sympathetic. Adjustment takes time. I let a small pause hang there, then gave her what she wanted. I'm willing to cooperate, I said. Within reason. That phrase didn't register to her. Not the way it should have. She heard the first part and ignored the rest. Classic mistake. Good, she said quickly. Then we can arrange controlled access to your fuel system. Scheduled distribution, perhaps. Managed through the HOA. There was out in the open now. Not just access. Control. I nodded again, slower this time, like I was thinking it through. I need to make some changes first, I said. Secure things properly. Liability, you know how it is. She waved that off immediately. Of course. As long as you're not restricting access entirely. No, I replied, keeping my voice even. Not entirely. The conversation wrapped shortly after that. She walked me back toward the door like she just closed a deal, like I was another box checked on her list of problems solved. And as I stepped outside, I could feel the shift behind me. People talking again. Quieter but different. Not suspicious anymore, reassured. That was the narrative she needed. That I'd folded. That she'd won. Over the next few days, I leaned into it. Locked the fuel system tighter than before. New reinforced latch, upgraded camera angles, motion sensors covering every approach. Anyone watching would assume I was preparing to share responsibly. In reality, I was sealing the perimeter. And then I waited. Patricia didn't disappoint. Her confidence grew fast, too fast. I started hearing about it from the same quiet channels as before. She was telling residents that fuel access had been secured, that distribution would begin pending final arrangements. Some were even being asked to contribute, small fees framed as maintenance costs, infrastructure support, administrative overhead. Nothing outrageous, just enough to sound legitimate. Just enough to build trust. I didn't interrupt, didn't correct it. Every word she spoke dug the hole deeper. By the end of the week, I noticed something new. A contractor van, one I'd seen at that meeting, parked near the edge of my property line. Not crossing it, not yet. Just sitting there, engine idling like it was waiting for permission that hadn't been given. I watched from a distance, hand in my pockets, expression neutral. Because now, it wasn't about if Patricia would cross the line. It was about when. And more importantly, how far she'd go once she believed no one was going to stop her. The first sign it was happening came just after sunrise. Engine noise, low and steady, cutting through the usual quiet like something out of place. I stepped out onto the porch with my coffee, letting the steam rise in the cool Wyoming air, and saw them rolling in 2 trucks this time. One of them was that same contractor van I'd noticed before. The other, flatbed, loaded with equipment. They didn't stop at the road. Didn't hesitate at the boundary markers I'd placed years ago. They came straight up to my gate. I didn't move right away. Just stood there, watching, counting. 3 men stepped out, all business, tool belts, gloves, the kind of confidence that comes from being told they're authorized. Then Patricia's SUV pulled in behind them, slower this time, deliberate. She stepped out last, sunglasses already on, posture upright, like she was walking into a press conference instead of a private property violation. I took a slow sip of coffee, set the mug down on the railing, and walked toward the gate. Calm, measured, every step intentional. Morning, I said as I approached, voice even. One of the contractors nodded, already reaching into the truck bed. We're here for the fuel access install, he said, like it was routine. I looked past him, straight at Patricia. You told him that? She didn't flinch, not even a little. We have an agreement, she replied smoothly, arms crossing just enough to signal authority. You said you'd cooperate. There it was, the distortion, the twist. Not misunderstanding, manipulation. I let a small pause stretch between us, just enough for the men to keep working. One of them pulled out bolt cutters. Heavy duty, industrial grade. I could hear the metal jaws click open, slow, deliberate, as he stepped toward my gate lock. You might want to stop him, I said quietly, still watching Patricia. She tilted her head, almost amused. Don't be dramatic, Gideon. This is just implementation. The cutter bit down. A sharp, echoing snap cut through the morning air, the sound of steel giving way. My lock dropped to the gravel with a dull thud. And just like that, they crossed the line. Literally. The gates swung open, hinges creaking as if even they weren't used to being forced. The men moved in, efficient, focused on the fuel system like it already belonged to them. I didn't raise my voice, didn't step in front of them, didn't do anything that might break the moment. Instead, I reached in my jacket pocket and tapped my phone screen once. Recording, clear, steady, time-stamped. Cameras mounted on the shed picked up the rest. Angles I'd installed days earlier, catching every movement, every face, every word. Patricia followed them inside the property like she was touring a facility she owned. Make sure the distribution point is accessible, she instructed, pointing toward the pump. We'll need a clean process for residents. Residents, not her property, not her equipment. But she spoke like it was already done, like ownership was just a matter of confidence. I walked a few steps closer, stopping just outside their immediate workspace. You're cutting locks, entering private property, and modifying equipment that doesn't belong to you, I said calmly. You sure about this? She turned to me, then, finally removing the sunglasses. Her eyes were sharp, but underneath that confidence, there was something else. Urgency. What I'm sure about, she said, voice tightening just slightly, is that I have dozens of residents depending on me to provide essential resources. We've already collected funds, Gideon. People are expecting access. There it was. Not just control, not just authority. Money. She'd taken it, promised something she didn't own, and now she was too far in to back out. That was the point of no return, not the cut lock, not the trespass, the admission. Spoken out loud, on record. I nodded slowly, like I was processing it. So you charged them for fuel you don't have? Her jaw tightened, just for a second. Then she recovered, stepping closer, lowering her voice. Don't try to twist this. This is infrastructure investment. And now we're securing it. Securing it. By force. By assumption. By fraud dressed up as leadership. Behind her, one of the contractors had already started examining the pump, tools laid out like they were preparing to reconfigure it. I could hear the faint hum of my cameras adjusting focus, capturing everything. And through it all, I stayed exactly where I needed to be, calm, cooperative, just enough to keep her moving forward. Because the worst mistake someone like Patricia can make is believing they've already won. Once the line was crossed, I didn't need to push anymore. I just needed to let her keep talking. That was the beauty of it. Patricia thought she was fixing a problem, but in reality, she was building a case against herself, one sentence at a time. I shifted slightly, stepping closer to the shed like I was trying to stay involved, nodding along just enough to look cooperative. So how many people did you say signed up for this? I asked, keeping my tone neutral, curious, not confrontational. She didn't hesitate. That was her second mistake. 32 households so far, she replied, almost proudly, each contributing toward fuel access and infrastructure. It's all documented. Documented. I'll let that word sit for a second, like I was impressed. That's the decent number, I said. What are they paying? One of the contractors glanced up briefly, then back to his tools. Patricia didn't even notice. Initial contribution was $1,200 per household, she said, lowering her voice slightly, as if that made it more legitimate. Plus monthly usage fees once distribution begins. I gave a slow nod, exhaling through my nose like I was doing the math. 32 households, $1,200 each. That was over $38,000 collected already. For fuel she didn't own. For access she didn't have. For infrastructure she was currently forcing into existence through trespass. And where's that money being held? I asked, still calm, still measured. That question, simple as it was, made her pause. Just a fraction. But I saw it. The HOA accounts, she said quickly. Too quickly. Managed through our administrative structure. Administrative structure. That vague language people use when they don't want to say exactly where money is going. I tilted my head slightly, like I was trying to understand. Same account that handles dues? She hesitated again. Longer this time. It's all centralized, she said finally. There it was. Commingling. HOA dues, resident contributions, and now private fuel access fees, all flowing into the same place. No operación. No transparency. No legal basis. Behind her, one of the men had started measuring the pump housing, talking quietly about modifying the output line. They were already planning physical alterations on equipment they had no legal right to touch. I let my eyes drift over to them, then back to her. You got insurance for this? I asked. She blinked. Of course. Specifically covering fuel distribution? Another pause. This one's sharper. Our HOA policy covers community operations. I gave a small, almost apologetic shrug. Fuel distribution isn't landscaping, Patricia. That's hazardous materials handling. Different category. Different liability. I watched it hit her. Not fully, not yet, but enough to create tension behind the confidence. She didn't back down, though. Couldn't. Not with people watching. Not with money already collected. We've consulted professionals, she snapped, gesturing toward the contractors. One of them shifted uncomfortably, clearly not wanting to be pulled into that claim. I nodded slowly, like I accepted it. Good, I said. Because if something goes wrong, that's not just civil liability. That's federal oversight. That word, federal, hung in the air like a change in weather. She heard it. I could see it in the way her posture stiffened just slightly. But pride kept her standing there. Nothing is going to go wrong, she said firmly. We're bringing order to a situation you've neglected. Neglected? I almost smiled at that. But I kept it buried. Because now I had everything I needed, and she had no idea. Verbal confirmation of collected funds. Admission of control over money. Acknowledgement of modifying private fuel infrastructure. Zero licensing. Zero permits for distribution. And most importantly, she believed it was all justified. That's what made it federal. Fraud wasn't just about stealing money. It was about knowingly misrepresenting ownership, authority, and service. And she'd done all three. On camera, I stepped back slightly, giving the contractors more room, like I was yielding control. Letting them work. Letting her think the resistance was gone. Because the more comfortable she felt, the deeper she'd go. Just make sure it's done right, I said quietly. Wouldn't want anyone getting hurt. She nodded, satisfied, already turning her attention back to directing the work like she owned the ground beneath her feet. And as I watched her, clipboard in hand, voice sharp with authority, completely blind to the weight of what she'd just admitted, I realized something simple. She wasn't just crossing lines anymore. She was rewriting them in a way that only ends one way when the truth finally catches up. The air had shifted, not in a way you could see, but you could feel it, the kind of stillness that settles right before something irreversible happens. The contractors had moved from inspection to action. Tools were laid out with purpose now. Wrenches tightening, fittings being adjusted, one of them already discussing how to reroute the output valve to make it accessible for multiple users. They weren't hesitating anymore. They were committing. Patricia stood at the center of it all, arms crossed, chin slightly raised, watching like a foreman overseeing her own operation. Every movement around her fed that sense of control, of ownership she hadn't earned but fully believed she had. I took a slow breath, letting the moment stretch just long enough to make what I said next land exactly where it needed to. "Patricia," I called out, not loud, but clear enough to cut through the noise. She turned, mildly annoyed at the interruption. "What now?" I stepped closer, boots crunching lightly against the gravel, posture relaxed, almost casual. "This is your last chance to stop," I said. No edge in my voice. No threat. Just fact. The kind that doesn't need volume to carry weight. She blinked once, then let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Oh, please," she said, waving a hand like she was brushing off a fly. "You've had plenty of chances to cooperate, Gideon. You chose not to." I didn't react. Didn't rise to it. Just held her gaze. "I'm not talking about cooperation," I said quietly. "I'm talking about what happens next if you keep going." That caught her attention, but not in the way it should have. Not caution, irritation. "What happens next?" she repeated, stepping closer, her heels digging into the gravel like she was staking a claim, "is that this community finally gets the resources it deserves. Because unlike you, I actually take responsibility for people." Behind her, one of the contractors started loosening a connection on the pump. Metal scraping against metal, the faint hiss of pressure releasing. Another had already set up a temporary hose line, testing flow like it was already operational. I glanced at them briefly, then back at her. "You've taken money," I said. "Promised access. And now you're altering private fuel infrastructure without permits, without licensing, without legal authority." Each point landed clean, deliberate. "You understand what that adds up to?" She didn't hesitate. Didn't even blink this time. "Progress," she said flatly. Then she smiled, that same sharp, polished smile, but now there was something else behind it, something brittle. "You really think throwing around legal words is going to scare me? I've been running organizations longer than you've been out here, playing pioneer." I exhaled slowly, almost like I was disappointed. "This isn't about scaring you." I let a small pause hang there, just long enough. "It's about giving you the chance to walk away before this becomes something you can't fix." That was it. The final door. Wide open. No tricks. No pressure. Just a line she could still step back from. And for a split second, just a fraction of a second, I thought she might actually take it. Her eyes flickered, not with doubt, but with calculation, running through outcomes, weighing perception. But then pride took over. It always does. She let out a quiet scoff, shaking her head like I just said something embarrassingly naive. "You know what I think?" she said, stepping in just a little closer, voice dropping into something colder. "I think you're a man who got used to being left alone, and now you don't know how to function when someone with actual authority steps in." The word authority, she emphasized it like saying it made it real. "And I think," she continued, eyes narrowing slightly, "that if you had anything real to stand on, you wouldn't be standing there giving speeches. You'd be doing something about it." I held her gaze, steady, unshaken. "I'm doing something," I said quietly. She laughed, short, sharp, dismissive. "No," she replied, turning away from me, already signaling the contractors to keep going. "You're not." And just like that, she made her choice. The last chance gone. The line crossed completely. Behind her, the sound of tools picked up again, louder now, more confident. Metal tightening. Systems shifting. Men working under the assumption that everything they were doing was legitimate. Patricia didn't look back. Didn't second-guess. She stood there, directing, correcting, asserting control over something that had never belonged to her. And in that moment, she wasn't just committing to the lie. She was locking herself into it, so completely, so publicly, that there was no version of this where she could walk away clean anymore. The sound came before the realization, distant at first, then unmistakable. Sirens. Not rushed, not chaotic, measured. Controlled. The kind of approach that says whoever's arriving already knows exactly what they're walking into. The contractor slowed. Just a little. Tools still in hand, but movements less certain. One of them glanced toward the road, then at Patricia. She didn't look, didn't react. "Not yet. Keep going," she snapped, sharper this time. "We're almost done here." That was the last order she'd ever give on my land. The vehicles rolled up in a tight formation, 2 patrol units, County markings clear against the dust, lights spinning slow and deliberate. They stopped just outside the open gate, the same gate her team had cut through minutes earlier. Doors opened. Boots hit gravel. Deputies stepped out. Not rushing, not posturing, just present. Professional. Watching. And that's when Patricia finally turned. You could see it happen in real time, the shift. The confidence still there, but now mixed with something else. Calculation again. Except this time, it wasn't working in her favor. Good, she said quickly, loud enough for everyone to hear. Perfect timing. Officers, I'm glad you're here. We've had an ongoing issue with resource obstruction, and that's enough. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't need to. The words cut clean through everything else. Conversation stopped. Tools went still. Even the wind seemed to pause for a second. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us, boots steady against the gravel. You've said quite a bit already today, I continued, calm, measured. Might want to save the rest. Patricia turned to me, irritation flashing back in a place like armor she thought still fit. Excuse me, she snapped. I reached into my jacket slowly, not sudden, not dramatic, and pulled out the one thing she'd never once considered. The badge caught the light just. Enough, polished metal, official seal, unmistakable. I held it where she could see it clearly. Gideon Cross, I said evenly. County Sheriff. The silence that followed, it wasn't empty. It was heavy, absolute, the kind that presses down on everyone at once. Patricia blinked. Once, twice, like her brain was trying to reject what her eyes were telling her. That's not, she started, but the words didn't land. One of the deputies stepped forward then, not aggressively, just enough to reinforce reality. Morning, Sheriff, he said, voice steady. And just like that, her version of the world collapsed. You could see it drain out of her face, the color, the certainty, the control. The same woman who'd been issuing orders seconds ago now stood completely still, eyes flicking between me, the badge, and the deputies behind me like she was searching for an exit that didn't exist. I didn't move closer, didn't crowd her. I didn't have to. Let's walk through this, I said, tone calm, almost conversational. You authorized entry onto private property, cutting a lock to do it. I gestured slightly toward the broken metal lying in the dirt. You directed unlicensed modification of a private fuel system. My eyes shifted briefly to the contractors, who were now very carefully stepping back. And you admitted, on record, that you've collected funds from residents for access to fuel you do not own. Each point landed slower than the last, deliberate. Final. Patricia opened her mouth, closed it again. The words weren't there anymore. That money, I continued, was pooled through HOA accounts without disclosure, without proper classification, and without any legal authority to provide the service you promised. I let that settle. Let sink in. That's fraud, Patricia. Not HOA overreach. Not a misunderstanding. Fraud. The word hit harder than anything else. You could see in the way her shoulders dropped, just slightly, but enough. I was acting in the community's best interest, she said finally, voice thinner now, stripped of its earlier sharpness. People needed, you took money under false pretenses. I cut in, not raising my voice, just removing the space she was trying to hide in. And then you trespassed to make it look legitimate. One of the deputies stepped forward again, this time with cuffs visible, not raised, not threatening, just present. Patricia saw them, and that's when it fully hit. The irony of it. The woman, who had called herself authority, standing on stolen ground, surrounded by actual authority, realizing, too late, that she'd been building her own case the entire time. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. No arguments, no commands, just the quiet, unmistakable sound of control slipping away. And for the first time since she stepped onto my land, Patricia Vance looked exactly like what she was. Not in charge, not protected, just caught. The shift from authority to accountability happened fast, and there was nothing Patricia could do to slow it down. One of the deputies stepped in beside her, voice calm but firm. Ma'am, turn around for me. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The weight behind it carried everything. Patricia didn't move at first. Her eyes flicked toward the small group of residents who had followed her out here earlier, the same people she'd been leading, convincing, collecting money from. They were watching now, not with trust, not with admiration, but with something colder. Doubt. Realization. "This is a misunderstanding," she said quickly, her voice tightening as she tried to regain control. "I'm the HOA president. I was acting on behalf of—" "Turn around, ma'am," the deputy repeated, cutting clean through the title she was trying to hide behind. That was the moment it broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just gone. The posture she'd carried all morning gone. The certainty gone. She turned slowly, like the movement itself was unfamiliar, and placed her hands behind her back. The cuffs clicked into place with a sharp, final sound that echoed across the open land. Metal on metal. No negociation. No appeal. Just consequence. One of the residents let out a quiet breath. Another stepped back entirely, shaking their head like they just realized how deep they'd been pulled into something they didn't understand. The contractors were already packing up. Fast, efficient, avoiding eye contact, tools disappearing back into the truck as if distance could erase what they'd just been part of. I didn't move. Just stood there, watching the scene settle into what it had always been heading toward. "You have the right to remain silent," the deputy began, voice steady, procedural. Patricia's head turned slightly, like she was trying to look back at me, but she didn't say anything. Not anymore, because now every word mattered. And for the first time, she understood that. Within minutes, the second layer of consequences started unfolding. Another vehicle pulled in, not marked like the others. Plain, federal. Two agents stepped out, folders already in hand, expressions unreadable. They didn't rush, didn't need to. One of them approached me first, offering a brief nod. "Sheriff Cross," he said quietly. "We've been reviewing the financial reports tied to that HOA account." I nodded once. "You'll want the footage," I replied. "Audio's clean. Full admission." He gave a small, satisfied glance toward Patricia, now standing beside the patrol car, hands cuffed, posture smaller than it had been all morning. "We figured as much." Then they turned to her. "Patricia Vance," one of them said, voice calm but carrying that unmistakable federal tone. "You're being investigated for wire fraud, misappropriation of funds, and financial deception involving interstate transactions." The words hit harder than the cuffs ever could. You could see it register, not all at once, but piece by piece. Fraud. Federal. Investigation. This wasn't HOA politics anymore. This wasn't something she could smooth over in a meeting or bury under paperwork. This was a system she couldn't control, couldn't intimidate, couldn't outmaneuver. I didn't," she started, voice cracking for the first time. The agent didn't let her finish. "You collected funds under false pretenses," he said, "represented ownership and access you did not have, and moved that money through accounts without proper disclosure." He paused, just long enough for it to land. "We'll sort out the rest downtown." Around us, the remaining residents had gone quiet. Completely. Some looked at Patricia, others looked at the ground. One older man shook his head slowly, like he was replaying every conversation he'd had with her over the past few weeks. Trust replaced with something else entirely. Betrayal. "What about our money?" someone asked from the edge of the group, voice uncertain but loud enough to carry. The federal agent didn't look away from Patricia. "Assets tied to this will be frozen pending investigation," he said. "Restitution will be determined through the courts." That was it. No promises. No quick fixes. Just process. Real, immovable process. Patricia's shoulders dropped further. Whatever version of control she thought she had left, it was gone now. Completely. The deputies guided her toward the patrol car. No resistance, no argument. Just quiet steps on gravel. The same ground she'd walked on it earlier like she owned it. The door opened. She paused for a second. Just one, like she was trying to hold on to something, anything that still made sense. But there wasn't anything left. Then she stepped in. The door shut. Clean. Final. As the vehicles began to pull away, the dust rose again, slow, steady, carried by the wind across land that hadn't changed at all. The only thing that had changed was who understood it. The dust settled long after the last patrol car disappeared over the ridge. Out here, things don't snap back to normal, they ease into it. The wind picks up, the land exhales, and whatever noise people brought with them slowly fades until all that's left is what was always here to begin with. I stood by the open gate for a while, looking at the broken lock still lying in the gravel. Bent metal, simple, quiet evidence of where someone decided rules didn't apply to them. I picked it up, turned it over once in my hand, then set on the workbench beside the shed. Not as a reminder of what happened, but as proof of how it ended. By the next morning, word had already spread through Vance Creek Estates. Not rumors this time, facts. Deputies had returned with documentation, federal notices posted, HOA accounts frozen pending full audit. The same residents who'd been standing behind Patricia just days ago were now standing in small groups at the edge of their own streets, talking in lower tones, trying to piece together how they'd been pulled into something so far outside what they thought they were signing up for. A few of them came out to my property later that week. Not in a group, not organized. One at a time. Different faces, same posture. Hesitant, unsure, carrying questions they didn't quite know how to ask. I didn't invite them in right away. Not out of suspicion, but because boundaries matter. Instead, I met them at the gate. The same place everything had changed. We didn't know, one of them said, middle-aged, hands rough from work, eyes steady but tired. She made it sound like everything was already approved. I nodded once. That's how it usually works, I replied. No blam, no lecture, just truth. Another man stepped forward, older, quieter. Is there any way to fix it? That question lingered for a moment. Not because the answer was complicated, but because it mattered how it was given. I looked past them briefly, toward the subdivision, the uniform. Houses, the people who had been sold certainty wrapped in authority. Then back at them. What she promised you doesn't exist, I said. Not the way she said it did. I paused, just enough to let that settle without hardening it. But that doesn't mean you're stuck. Over the next few weeks, things began to shift. Not fast, not clean, but steady. The HOA was placed under temporary oversight while investigators worked through the financial records. Every dollar traced, every transaction examined. What came out of it wasn't pretty, layered accounts, redirected funds, documentation that didn't match the story Patricia had told. But it was clear enough that restitution processes were put into motion. People would get their money back. Not all at once, not immediately, but through a system that couldn't be bent or rushed. And out here, that kind of certainty matters more than speed. As for the land, I repaired what needed repairing. New lock, reinforced gata, cameras adjusted, not out of fear, but out of principle. The fuel system stayed exactly what it had always been, private, permitted, and untouched by anything that didn't belong. But something else changed too. Not the land, the line around it. One afternoon, I installed a small sign just beside the gate. Nothing aggressive. No warnings. Just a simple statement. Property boundaries are not suggestions. It wasn't for me. It was for anyone who might forget the difference between access and ownership. The residents noticed. Not the sign specifically, but what it represented. The quiet return of order. A few of them started organizing on their own. Reviewing HOA bylaws, asking the right questions this time, making sure whoever stepped into leadership next understood exactly what they were and weren't allowed to do. No grand speeches, no power plays, just people learning where the real lines were and respecting them. One evening, as the sun dropped low over the ridge, I stood by the pump again. Same routine, same steady rhythm. The metallic click, the hum of the system, the faint scent of fuel carried on dry air. Nothing about it had changed. And that was the point. Peace, out here, isn't something you create. It's something you protect. Not with noise, not with force, just with clarity. And the understanding that some things, land, property, truth, don't belong to whoever claims them the loudest. They belong to whoever can prove it when it matters most. What stands out in this story is not just the abuse of authority, but how fragile that authority really was when it faced something real. Patricia believed power came from titles, from appearances, from how confidently she could speak in front of others. But the moment her assumptions met actual law, actual ownership, and actual accountability, everything she built collapsed almost instantly. What is striking is how quickly a narrative can replace truth when people stop verifying what they are told. Those residents were not foolish. They were simply trusting, and that trust was turned into a tool against them. And yet, the resolution did not come from anger or force. It came from patience, restraint, and a clear understanding of boundaries. That is what makes this kind of justice so powerful. It is not loud. It does not need to be. It simply stands firm until everything false falls away. So here is something to think about. If someone tried to claim control over your property, your resources, or your rights with nothing but confidence and paperwork, would you push back immediately, or would you step back and let them reveal exactly who they really are? I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.